Why saving money feels harder than making it. You get a raise. Finally, after months of showing up early, staying late, doing everything right, the number on your paycheck goes up. And for like 2, maybe 3 days, you feel incredible. You think to yourself, okay, this is it. This is when things start to change. I'm going to save more, spend less, actually get my finances together. And then somehow, 2 weeks later, you check your bank account and it's basically the same as before. Maybe even a little lower. And you just sit there staring at the screen thinking, where did it go? I literally made more money this month. If that hit a little too close to home, I want you to stay with me for a second. Because you are not bad with money. You're not lazy. You're not irresponsible. You're just human. And there are some very specific, very real psychological and behavioral reasons why saving feels so much harder than earning does. And here's the thing that honestly took me years to fully understand. Understanding why it's hard is actually the first step to making it easier. My name is Adam, and I spend probably too much time thinking about money. Not in the spreadsheet obsessed to wake up at 4 a.m. way, but more in the why do people who earn good money still feel broke? And why does something as simple as saving feel like climbing a wall with no handholds kind of way? I've had conversations with friends, I've read the research, I've lived some of it myself. And what I keep coming back to is that the problem with saving isn't really about money at all. It's about how our brains are wired, how our environments are designed, and how the stories we tell ourselves either help us or quietly work against us. So in this video, we're going to get into all of it. Why your brain literally resists saving, why making more money often doesn't solve the problem, why willpower is kind of a lie, and what actually works. Not in a drink less coffee and you'll retire early way, but in a genuinely practical, psychologically grounded way. This is going to be a longer one, but I promise it's worth it. Let's get into it. Your brain wasn't built for saving. Let's start at the very beginning, which is your brain. And I know, every money video starts with, here's what your brain does, and it can feel a little abstract. But stick with me, because this one actually matters. Here's the thing about human psychology. We are wired, deeply wired, to prioritize the present over the future. And that's not a character flaw. That's literally how our ancestors survived. When you're living in an environment where food might not be there tomorrow, the smartest thing to do is eat today. Save energy, get the reward now, and deal with the future when it arrives. That instinct kept human beings alive for hundreds of thousands of years. The problem is we're still running that ancient software in a world where the right move is almost always the opposite. Now the smart thing is to delay the reward. Invest today, spend less now so that future you has something to work with. But your brain doesn't naturally like that. It finds it genuinely uncomfortable. Psychologists call this hyperbolic discounting, which is just a fancy term for saying that we value things in the near future much more than things far away. Like if I asked you whether you wanted $100 today or $150 in a month, most people, even people who know better, feel a strong pull toward taking the 100 now. The logic says wait, the brain says take it. And this is why saving feels hard. You're not just fighting laziness, you're fighting something that runs much deeper. Every time you don't buy something and put that money in savings instead, your brain is registering that as a small loss. You gave something up. The future reward is too abstract, too distant, too uncertain to feel as real as the thing right in front of you. Adam, that's me, I used to tell myself that I just needed to be more disciplined, more motivated, more serious. But the more I understood about how the brain actually works, the more I realized that discipline is kind of a band-aid on a deeper issue. You can't willpower your way out of a system that was built to work against you. You have to change the system. The takeaway here is simple but important. Don't treat saving as a test of your character. It's a design problem. And design problems need design solutions, not just more effort. The invisible expansion of your lifestyle. Okay, so here's something that I think is underappreciated and honestly a little uncomfortable to talk about. There's this thing called lifestyle inflation. And it sounds like a buzzword, but the reality of it is so subtle and so relentless that most people never even notice it's happening to them. Here's basically how it works. You're making, say, $40,000 a year. Life is tight, but you figure it out. You cook at home most nights, you drive an older car, you don't think too hard about whether that jacket is really worth it. Then you get a promotion and you're at $55,000. And things start to shift, gradually, almost invisibly. You eat out a little more, you upgrade your apartment because you deserve something nicer. You start buying the slightly better version of things. You take a real vacation instead of the budget road trip. None of these individual decisions feel extreme. They all feel reasonable. They all feel earned. But here's what's actually happening. Your expenses grew at almost exactly the same rate as your income. So even though you're making significantly more money than you were 2 years ago, the gap between what you earn and what you spend, which is the only gap that matters for building any kind of financial security, is roughly the same, or sometimes smaller. I have a friend, Sarah, who is genuinely one of the smartest people I know. She got a great job out of college, worked her way up, got raise after raise, and a few years in, she mentioned to me that she felt like she was always just barely keeping up. I was kind of surprised. From the outside, it seemed like she was doing so well. And she said something that really stuck with me. She said, "Every time I make more money, I feel like I should be able to live better. And then I do live better, and then I need even more." And it wasn't that she was being irresponsible, she was just doing what felt natural, what felt proportional, what our culture basically tells you to do when you earn more. The thing is, there's nothing wrong with enjoying your money. That's not the point. The point is that lifestyle inflation happens automatically, almost unconsciously. And if you don't have some kind of intentional counterpressure, your savings rate stays flat no matter how much your income grows. So what do you actually do about this? The simplest, most effective thing I've heard is this. Every time your income goes up, automate a portion of that increase directly to savings or investments before it ever touches your checking account. You never see it, you never adjust your lifestyle around it, it just disappears into the future. It sounds almost too simple, but the psychology behind it is rock solid. You can only inflate your lifestyle around money you actually see. The pain of paying. Here's something kind of wild that I think about a lot. Spending money actually causes a measurable response in the part of your brain associated with physical pain, like real, actual pain. Just very mild, very brief. And you'd think that would make spending harder, right? But the modern financial world has become incredibly sophisticated at reducing that pain signal as much as possible. Think about it. Cash is painful to spend. You physically hand it over. You watch it leave. Debit cards are a little less painful. Credit cards are even less. One-click purchasing online? Almost painless. Buy now, pay later apps? The pain is not just reduced, it's deferred completely. And apps and websites are designed very deliberately to keep you in a state of low friction, low pain, high impulsivity. So when someone says, "I have no idea where my money goes," that's usually not because they're not paying attention. It's because the systems they're using are literally engineered to make the pain of paying as invisible as possible. The old advice used to be, use cash for everything. And there's actually real psychology behind that. When you pay cash, the money feels real. The transaction feels real. You are less likely to overspend because you can see it happening. Now, switching entirely to cash in 2025 is kind of impractical, I get that. But what you can do is periodically review your spending in a way that makes the numbers feel real. Not a quick scroll. Sit down with a number, read it out loud, and ask yourself, did I actually feel like I got that much value out of this? That small ritual of making spending feel real again can shift your behavior more than any budget app. The problem with willpower. I want to spend a little time on willpower because I think we collectively overestimate how much it can do for us, especially around money. There's a really well-known concept in psychology called ego depletion. The idea that willpower is like a muscle that gets tired. The more decisions you make, the more temptations you resist throughout the day, the less capacity you have to keep making good decisions. By the time you're tired, stressed, a little frustrated, and you see something shiny online at 10 o'clock at night, Your willpower is basically on empty. And that's when the impulse purchase happens. That's when the "I'll just treat myself" voice wins. And here's the thing, the financial industry knows this. Retail websites have studied what time of day people are most likely to make impulse purchases. Stores are designed with the things you don't need near the exit, when your guard is lowest. It's not a level playing field. Relying on willpower to save money is like trying to win a race on foot against someone in a car. Even if you're a great runner, the odds are just not in your favor. So the shift I'd encourage is this. Stop trying to be more disciplined and start trying to make the right choice the easiest choice. Set up automatic transfers to savings on payday. Remove saved payment info from shopping sites. Put a 24-hour rule on any non-essential purchase over a certain amount. These aren't hacks, they're structural changes that make it so you don't have to rely on willpower at all. Because every time you can remove the decision entirely, you win. The identity layer nobody talks about. This is the part of the conversation that I think gets skipped the most. And honestly, I think it might be the most important. Because underneath all the psychology and the behavioral stuff, there's identity. There's the story you tell yourself about who you are. A lot of people, without realizing it, have absorbed a self-image that is subtly incompatible with financial security. Not because they're pessimistic, but because of how they grew up, what they watched their parents do, what their friend group normalizes, what the media they consume shows them about people like them. If you grew up in a household where money was always tight, where saving wasn't really discussed, where spending money was kind of the only tool people had to feel good when things were hard, then that's the financial environment your brain learned from. And even if your income situation is completely different now, you might still be running those old patterns, because that's just what feels normal. That's what feels like you. Here's a practical version of this. Some people have a deep internal story that says, "I'm not the kind of person who has savings." And that sounds depressing when you say it out loud, but it's shockingly common. And what happens is that when money does start to accumulate, when the account balance actually starts to go up, it creates a subtle psychological discomfort. It doesn't feel like you. And so, almost unconsciously, things happen that bring the balance back down. A necessary expense, a gift for someone, a treat, something. I'm not trying to make this feel hopeless, quite the opposite. Because once you can see the story, you can start to write a new one. It starts small. Maybe it's just noticing when a decision feels driven by identity rather than logic. Maybe it's starting to say things to yourself like, "I'm someone who saves a little every month." Not as an affirmation you scream in the mirror, but as a quiet, honest, ongoing commitment to a different version of yourself. Identity change is slow, but it's also the most durable kind of change there is. Social pressure is a real financial force. Let's talk about something that is honestly a bit uncomfortable to acknowledge, which is how much of our spending is driven not by what we actually want, but by what we think other people expect. We spend money to belong, to signal that we're doing okay, to not feel out of place in our social circles, to not be the person who suggests a cheaper restaurant or skips the group trip. And again, this is completely human. Belonging is a fundamental need. Social acceptance is not shallow or trivial. But when the cost of belonging is consistently higher than what you can actually afford, it quietly eats away at any financial progress you try to make. There's this concept called keeping up with the Joneses that's been around forever. But I think the modern version of it is actually way more intense, because now you're not just keeping up with your actual neighbors, you're keeping up with everyone you follow online. You're seeing the vacations, the home renovations, the restaurants, the lifestyles of people you'll never meet, and your brain is registering all of it as a kind of social benchmark, and it is relentless. The practical move here isn't to withdraw from social life or become someone who lectures their friends about money. It's to get very honest with yourself about which spending is genuinely bringing you joy and which spending is really just managing anxiety about how you're perceived. That distinction is worth spending some time with, because a lot of the purchases that feel most necessary are actually just attempts to feel okay, and there are cheaper ways to feel okay. The myth of the perfect budget. I want to gently push back on something that I think a lot of personal finance content gets wrong, which is the idea that the solution to not saving enough is a more detailed, more perfect budget. Like if you just track everything precisely enough, you'll finally get it together. And look, I'm not against budgets. Budgets are useful. But for a lot of people, the rigid, detailed budget actually makes things worse because it creates a kind of all or nothing mentality. You follow the budget perfectly for 2 weeks, then you slip up once, and then the whole thing feels ruined, and you spend the next week recovering before starting over. This is the financial equivalent of being on a very strict diet and then eating an entire cake because you had one cookie. What tends to work better is what I'd call a values-first approach to money. Instead of starting with categories and limits, start with a simple question. What do I actually want my money to do for me? Not in a vague, dreamy way. Literally, what specific things do you want? Security, travel, owning a home, not panicking when your car breaks down? And then you build around those priorities. You save for those things deliberately, and everything else you spend with a little more looseness. Because the goal isn't to control every dollar, it's to make sure the dollars that matter most are protected. Simplicity is more sustainable than perfection. A rough framework you actually follow will always beat a perfect system you abandoned in week 3. Why future you feels like a stranger? I want to come back to something we touched on earlier because I think it deserves its own moment. There is actual research, real, peer-reviewed, fascinating research showing that when people think about their future selves, the part of the brain that activates is the same part that activates when thinking about a stranger. Not yourself, a stranger. Which means that saving money for future you doesn't fully feel like saving money for you. It kind of feels like giving money to someone you don't really know. And that, at a deep neurological level, makes it harder to motivate yourself to do it. This is why making your future self feel real is actually a legitimate financial strategy. Some people use apps that age progress their photo so they can look at who they're saving for. Some people write letters to their future selves. Some people just spend 5 minutes actually imagining, not vaguely, but specifically, what their life looks like at 60 if they save consistently versus if they don't. The more vivid and concrete that future person feels, the more willing your brain is to make sacrifices for them now. It sounds a little unusual, but the psychology behind it is solid. Make future you real. Give future you a name, a face, a specific life, because you are more likely to protect someone you can actually see. The small win problem. Here's a quick one that I think matters more than people realize. One of the reasons saving feels unrewarding, and therefore hard to maintain, is that the feedback loop is terrible. When you spend money, the reward is immediate. You get the thing, you feel good right now. When you save money, the reward is distant, abstract, and invisible. Your bank balance goes up by a number on a screen and nothing happens. No celebration, no confirmation that you did something meaningful, just a slightly larger number in a quiet account somewhere. This is a real psychological problem, and it's worth designing around. Find a way to make saving feel rewarding in the short term. Some people use a visible tracker, a chart on their fridge, a savings thermometer, some visual that they can see getting filled in. Some people have a small celebration when they hit a milestone, even something tiny. This isn't frivolous, it's genuinely helping your brain connect the behavior to a positive feeling, which makes the behavior more automatic over time. The goal is to make saving feel like something you get to do, not something you have to do. Conclusion: the real reason it feels harder and what that means. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. Let's bring it home. Why does saving money feel harder than making it? Because making money triggers reward. It feels like winning. Saving money, by contrast, asks you to give something up now for a benefit your brain can barely register. It asks you to fight instincts that have been running for thousands of years. It asks you to be stronger than systems that were specifically designed to make you spend. And it asks you to connect emotionally with a version of yourself that currently feels more like a stranger than a familiar face. That is genuinely hard. And I think the first thing to do before any strategy, before any budget, before any app, is to just acknowledge that. You're not failing because you lack discipline. You're struggling because the game is hard. And it was always going to be hard for almost everyone. That doesn't mean you're stuck. It means you need to be smarter about how you approach it. Stop relying on motivation because motivation comes and goes. Build systems that work when motivation is low. Automate, simplify, make the right choices easy and the impulse choices slightly harder. Work on the identity piece because no strategy survives a self-image that contradicts it. Start telling yourself a different story, quietly, consistently, without fanfare. I'm someone who saves. Say it until it starts to feel true. Then act like it until it becomes true. And be compassionate with yourself through the process. Financial change is slow. There will be months that go sideways. There will be moments where you look at your account and feel frustrated. That's normal. That's not failure. That's just the process. I think about my friend Sarah sometimes and how much she'd relaxed around money once she stopped treating every misstep like evidence that she was hopeless with it. She started small, literally just automating $50 a month to savings and not touching it. It grew, slowly at first, then not so slowly. And the most interesting thing she told me wasn't about the money. It was that she started feeling different, calmer, like she had a little more ground underneath her feet. That's what saving actually gives you. It's not really about the number. It's about the feeling of being slightly less at the mercy of whatever comes next. And that, I think, is worth working toward. Thanks for watching. If this gave you something to think about, share it with someone who might need it too. And I'll see you in the next one.